Okay, so you want to start an OnlyFans agency. No land to buy, no factory to build, no crop to plant. Just a laptop, a handful of contracts, and a roster of creators you manage in exchange for a cut of what they earn. That's the plan in your head, and on the surface, it looks almost frictionless. Subscription platforms process billions of dollars a year. Find a few creators, handle their marketing and their messages, take a percentage, and let the internet do what it's done for over a decade. Monetize attention. You picture a small team on laptops, a chat dashboard open in one tab, a payout report open in another, numbers ticking upward while someone else does the part that actually generates the content. You look at that picture and think, this is basically running a talent agency, with none of the overhead a talent agency used to need. No office required, no studio required, no inventory sitting on a shelf. Just people, phones, and a platform that already built the plumbing. Simple.
Here's the problem. That image is the one part of this business that lies to you the most. The truth is, a legitimate OnlyFans agency is not really a marketing business. It is a risk management operation that happens to sell subscriptions. And the marketing is almost the easiest part of the entire operation. The moment you understand that difference, everything about how an agency makes money and how it quietly loses money starts to make sense. Let's start with what it actually costs to get real revenue moving, because sign a few creators is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence. There isn't one type of agency arrangement. There are several, and each one is a completely different bet on how you want to compete. At the small end sits the freelance management model, 1 or 2 operators handling 2 or 3 creators directly, taking a negotiated cut, usually somewhere between 20 and 30% of net earnings, with almost no fixed overhead beyond a laptop and a messaging tool. In the middle sits the boutique agency, a small team of chatters, a content editor, and a marketing lead, managing anywhere from 5 to 20 creators, usually taking 30 to 40% and carrying real payroll for the first time. At the top sits the full-service agency, sometimes called a management house, running dozens of creators through a shared content pipeline, a dedicated marketing department buying traffic on ad networks that still allow it, and a revenue share that can run as high as 50%, justified by the promise of turning an unknown account into a 5-figure-a-month earner. Each of these is a different answer to the same underlying question. Do you stay lean, flexible, and dependent on a handful of relationships, or do you build a machine with real fixed costs in exchange for scale and a bigger slice of a bigger pie? That single decision shapes every other number in this business. Now here's where the naive mental model completely falls apart. And this is the part almost nobody researching this business expects. In most industries, you build your infrastructure once you have paying customers. In the creator management business, the order is often reversed, because the single hardest resource to acquire isn't a creator. It's a working payment rail. Payment processors and banks treat adult-adjacent revenue as high risk, full stop, regardless of how legal the underlying activity is. Before you sign your first serious creator, you need a business bank account that won't freeze the moment deposits start looking like recurring subscription income from a platform the bank's compliance team has flagged internally. You need a merchant arrangement, or a relationship with a payout processor that won't hold your funds in a rolling reserve for weeks at a time as a hedge against chargebacks. Many mainstream banks simply decline to open accounts for anything they can trace back to adult content once the underwriting team does its research. The same reflex that made crop insurance nearly impossible to find for a licensed cannabis grower applied here to something that isn't even the product itself, just the money that flows from it. So the real first expense in this business isn't a camera or a chat license. It's the time and legal cost of building banking relationships that survive contact with a compliance department.
sometimes months before a single subscription dollar has anywhere legitimate to land. So what does the actual build cost once the banking is sorted? A functioning boutique operation needs a content management and messaging suite to keep chatters working from a shared queue, rather than a single phone, typically running a few hundred to a couple $1,000s a month, depending on how many seats and creators you're running through it. It needs a customer relationship layer to track subscriber spending patterns, tip triggers, and churn, because the entire revenue model depends on identifying which subscribers are worth a personalized message and which ones are a waste of a chatter's time. Photography and video equipment for creators who don't already own their own gear runs anywhere from a few $100s for a basic ring light and phone rig to several thousand for a small studio setup with proper lighting, backdrops, and a dedicated camera. And agencies that promise, "We'll build your content for you," as part of the pitch, are quietly absorbing that cost themselves. Editing software, whether a monthly subscription suite or a part-time editor's salary, sits in the range of hundreds to a few $1,000s a month, depending on volume. Ad spend, where it's still allowed at all, is its own line item entirely, because most mainstream platforms restrict or outright ban advertising for explicit or adult-adjacent content, pushing agencies toward workaround channels, Reddit promotion, Twitter and X engagement farming, and search engine-optimized free preview funnels, each with its own cost and its own risk of the account behind it getting suspended without warning. Add secure file storage, a chat scripting library, and basic legal document templates for creator contracts, and a lean but genuinely functional agency setup can land somewhere between $5,000 and $20,000 before the first full month of real revenue clears. It rarely resembles the picture of two laptops and a dream that the pitch decks imply. Now, the software and staffing decision. And it's the same trap that catches gym owners and cannabis growers alike, just wearing different packaging. You can build your own chat and CRM stack, keeping monthly fees low, but eating the setup time and the risk of choosing tools that don't scale. Or you can license an all-in-one agency platform that bundles messaging, analytics, and payout tracking, paying a recurring fee that scales with the number of creators and chatters you run through it. That recurring fee doesn't know or care whether your best creator just had a slow month, whether a platform algorithm change cut a top performer's visibility in half, or whether 3 of your subscribers just charged back their last 2 payments. The bill is due regardless. You've simply chosen which fixed cost you'd rather carry, the labor of building it yourself, or the certainty of a monthly number that follows you whether revenue is up or down. Now add the people, because staffing is where this business actually lives or dies, far more than the platform itself. The core labor unit isn't a manager, it's a chatter, someone who spends hours a day inside a creator's messages, in character as that creator, building rapport with subscribers, pushing custom content sales, and chasing tips, often working overnight shifts to cover time zones a single creator physically can't be awake for. Reputable agencies run chatters in shifts, log every message for quality control, and pay a base rate plus commission on what they sell, typically landing somewhere between minimum wage and a modest hourly rate, plus a small percentage of whatever that shift generates. Less reputable operators run chatters off the books, pay flat piece rates with no oversight, and treat the entire function as disposable, cheap, high-turnover labor. Turnover in this role is genuinely brutal. The emotional labor of pretending to be someone else for 8 hours a day burns people out fast. And a chatter who understands a creator's specific subscribers, their spending habits, their inside jokes, their triggers, takes real weeks to train
and represents a real loss of institutional revenue knowledge every time they quit. There is no equivalent of a security clearance here, no government body vetting your staff, which means the entire quality control burden sits on the agency itself, through contracts, non-disclosure agreements, and internal monitoring. Because a single chatter behaving unprofessionally, or worse, screenshotting and leaking private messages, can damage a creator's account and the agency's reputation in a single afternoon, with no regulator to appeal to and no license to fall back on.
There's a category of risk here that a normal marketing agency simply doesn't have to think about: platform risk. A field is exposed to weather. An OnlyFans account is exposed to a platform's own internal policy decisions, which can change without warning and without appeal. In August 2021, OnlyFans itself announced it would ban sexually explicit content on the platform entirely, a policy shift driven by pressure from its banking and payment partners rather than by the company's own preference, before reversing that decision about a week later after a wave of creator and public backlash and reassurance from those same financial partners. For the days that announcement stood, every agency and every creator on the platform was staring at the sudden, total collapse of their primary revenue channel, through no fault of their own operations, purely because a payment processor upstream had gotten nervous. That single event is the clearest illustration of the entire industry's structural fragility. The actual product being sold is content, but the actual business being run is a bet on the continued goodwill of banks and card networks that can, and occasionally do, pull the rug with almost no notice. Chargebacks work the same way on a smaller, constant scale. A subscriber disputes a charge with their card issuer, the funds get clawed back, and if chargeback rates on an account climb too high, the payment processor can flag the entire account for review, freeze payouts, or drop it altogether, wiping out weeks of earned revenue that had already been counted as banked. There's also a genuine legal exposure that has no clean equivalent in most small businesses: verification and record keeping. Every creator on the platform has to be age verified and identity verified before they can monetize. And in the United States federal law, under Section 2257, requires the platform, and by extension, anyone handling that content on the creator's behalf, to maintain records proving every performer was a consenting adult at the time content was produced. An agency operating close to that line, helping manage uploads, custom content requests, or collaborations between creators, inherits real exposure if those records aren't airtight. This is where the industry's genuinely dark practices live too, and it's worth naming plainly rather than glossing over. Some operators have run ghost chatting, not just as customer engagement, but as outright impersonation, designed to keep subscribers paying for a relationship with someone who was never actually talking to them. And a smaller number of bad actors have used the promise of agency representation to pressure or coerce creators into producing content against their genuine interest. These aren't edge cases the industry pretends don't exist. They're the specific practices that regulators, payment processors, and the platforms themselves cite whenever they tighten verification rules or freeze payouts industry-wide. And every legitimate agency inherits some of that reputational and regulatory weight just by operating in the same market. Let's talk about geography, because for an agency, location isn't really about foot traffic either. It's about which jurisdiction your business entity sits in when the payout report generates, and which country your creators are physically in when they produce content. Every country runs different age verification law, different tax treatment of platform income, and different rules about what counts as adult content, requiring a specific business license versus ordinary self-employment income. Some jurisdictions treat a creator's platform earnings as straightforward freelance income,
Others require a specific adult industry business registration before an agency can legally take a commission at all. And a growing number of US states have passed age verification laws for adult platforms that create compliance overhead and legal risk an agency incorporated in a different state or country has to navigate creator by creator. You don't get to pick a single set of rules and apply them everywhere. In most cases, you're managing a patchwork. One jurisdiction's rules for where your business is registered, another set for where each individual creator lives, and a third layer of rules from the platform itself sitting on top of both. Which brings us to the single number that explains almost everything else about whether an agency actually turns a profit: the platform's take rate. OnlyFans keeps 20% of gross revenue off the top, a flat cut that applies before an agency ever sees a dollar, regardless of how the money was earned: subscription, tip, or pay-per-view message. That 20% doesn't move with volume. It doesn't shrink because a creator is popular. And it doesn't care whether the account is a $100 a month niche page or a six-figure a month top performer. Here's the part almost nobody planning this business accounts for going in. After that 20% is gone, the agency's own cut comes out of what's left, typically 20 to 50% depending on the tier of service. And only then does the creator see their share. Layer those two cuts together, and a creator on a full-service 50% agency deal is keeping somewhere close to 40% of what subscribers actually paid, before the creator's own production costs, and before either side has paid a cent of their personal income tax on it. Read that again. A little over half the gross revenue a subscriber sends never reaches the person who made the sale possible in the first place. Split between a platform that owns the pipes and an agency that owns the marketing and the messaging. And here's the genuinely counterintuitive part, the piece of this business that flips the naive assumption on its head. You'd think the safest strategy is to sign as many creators as possible and run them all through the same chat scripts and the same promotional playbook, the same instinct that makes you want a bigger field or a bigger gym floor. But because both the platform's cut and the agency's cut are percentages of revenue rather than flat fees, an agency running dozens of low-earning generic accounts through a shared chatter pool often makes less per hour of labor than an agency running a handful of genuinely well-branded, highly engaged creators with real subscriber loyalty. A high-volume roster of interchangeable accounts competes on price, drives down average subscription cost across the board, and burns chatter hours on subscribers who are never going to spend much, regardless of how good the messaging was. A smaller roster of creators with a distinct identity, consistent posting, and real subscriber relationships commands higher subscription prices and higher tip and custom content revenue per hour of chatter time. This is why the sector's real story hasn't been biggest roster wins. It's been a wave of agencies that scaled fast by signing anyone willing to sign, burning through chatter payroll on accounts that never earned enough to justify the labor, while a smaller number of quality-focused shops managing fewer, stronger creators have had a much easier time staying profitable. There's a saturation problem sitting underneath all of this too, and it happened in a compressed burst, the same way Canadian cannabis cultivation capacity overshot demand in the 2 years after legalization. In 2020 and 2021, subscription platform signups exploded, driven partly by pandemic-era income loss, pushing far more people to try creating content than the market of paying subscribers could realistically support. New accounts flooded in far faster than new spending did, and average earnings for a typical, non-top-tier account fell as the total subscriber base got split across a much larger number of creators competing for the same attention and the same discretionary spending. That oversupply didn't reverse. Years later, the accounts created during that rush are still competing in a far more crowded market than existed when the platform first scaled. quietly suppressing the average revenue every new agency signing, every new unestablished creator can realistically expect, the same way an overbuilt grow room quietly suppresses the wholesale price every cannabis farmer gets paid long after the initial boom ended.
There's also a structural choice sitting underneath all of this, similar to the franchise decision a gym owner faces or the supply agreement decision a cannabis grower faces. Do you build your own independent brand as an agency, marketing yourself directly to creators and building a reputation from scratch, or do you operate as white label labor for a larger, already established management house, running the chat shifts and content calendars under someone else's brand for a fixed hourly or commission rate? White labeling gets you a steady flow of already recruited creators and skips years of building trust in an industry where creators are, for good reason, deeply wary of handing account access to strangers. It also means you're a price taker, working for whatever margin the larger house keeps after its own cut, with little control over which creators you're assigned or how the relationship is structured. An independent agency keeps the full spread, but has to build creator trust and subscriber-facing brand recognition from nothing, in a market where thousands of competing agencies are making the exact same pitch to the exact same pool of prospective creators. There is one channel that lets an agency and creator escape the platform's 20% entirely, though it comes with its own overhead. A creator can build an independent subscription website, run their own payment processing directly, and market their platform account as a funnel toward that owned channel rather than the destination itself, keeping the full spread minus whatever a standalone payment processor charges. It's the closest thing this industry has to a high-margin side channel sitting inside an otherwise heavily taxed business. The catch is that it requires its own merchant account, which runs into the exact same high-risk banking wall described earlier, its own hosting and security infrastructure, and a subscriber base loyal enough to follow a creator off a platform they already trust onto one they've never used before. Very few small operations build a large enough direct following to make this a primary revenue stream. But for the creators and agencies who do, it's often the only part of the business where the split isn't cut in half before either side sees a dollar. Now, the marketing layer, and it works in reverse of how you'd expect compared to most consumer businesses. A gym is designed to maximize emotional attachment through branding, mirrors, and lighting. Cannabis packaging in Canada is legally required to minimize it. Adult subscription marketing sits somewhere else entirely. It isn't restricted by the platform itself, but it's aggressively restricted by everyone the platform depends on to reach new subscribers. Meta, Google, and most mainstream ad networks either ban adult-adjacent advertising outright or enforce it inconsistently enough that an account promoting a creator's page can get suspended without warning, taking weeks of built-up audience targeting data with it. That pushes agencies toward a narrower set of channels. Organic growth on platforms like Reddit and Twitter and X, where policies are looser. Search engine optimized teaser content designed to funnel traffic without tripping content filters, and cross-promotion between creators who already have overlapping audiences. Every one of those channels carries its own account suspension risk, and losing a well-built promotional account is functionally the same shock as losing a payment processor, a sudden, total collapse of a channel that took months to build, with no appeal process that reliably works, and no guarantee the replacement account will ever perform as well as the one that got banned. Every creator's account is also monitored, transaction by transaction, for the same reason a cannabis grower's plants are tracked seed to sale, because the payment processors sitting behind the platform require constant fraud and chargeback monitoring, or they'll pull the plumbing entirely. That monitoring overhead is a real, ongoing cost most first-time agency owners under budget dispute management, identity re-verification when a payment processor flags an account, and the sheer administrative time of responding to compliance requests that can arrive with little warning and tight deadlines. And there's a smaller cost that catches people the same way lab testing catches a first-time cannabis grower: chargeback reserves. Payment processors routinely hold back a percentage of revenue in a rolling reserve specifically to cover future disputes, meaning an agency and its creators don't actually get access to all the money a subscriber paid the moment they paid it. A real chunk sits held for weeks, sometimes longer, as a hedge against exactly the kind of dispute this business generates constantly, given how often subscribers dispute recurring charges they forgot they'd signed up for. Now, let's talk about what happens when all of this goes wrong, because the honest answer is, for a meaningful share of this industry, it already has, over and over, in smaller versions of the same collapse. Picture a mid-sized agency that scaled fast during the post-2020 boom, signing dozens of new creators on the promise of turning them into top earners, hiring a large chatter team to cover them all, and leaning entirely on one payment processor relationship for every dollar of revenue. When that single processor tightens its risk tolerance, as high-risk category processors periodically do industry-wide, freezing payouts pending a compliance review, or raising reserve requirements overnight, an agency with no second banking relationship and no cash buffer can go from fully staffed to unable to make payroll within a single pay cycle, despite every creator on the roster still actively earning subscriber revenue that simply isn't reaching anyone yet. The structural lesson mirrors what happened to over-leveraged cannabis producers who scaled before the market could support the capacity. The collapse rarely comes from nobody wanting to buy the product. It comes from a gap between how fast the business scaled its obligations, payroll, ad spend, promised creator payouts, and how fragile the single financial pipeline underneath all of it actually was. So how does the math actually work in plain terms? Once you strip away the chat dashboards and get to the spreadsheet, picture a boutique agency running 8 creators through a shared chatter team, taking a 35% cut of net platform earnings, fixed monthly costs, base pay for 3 or 4 chatters working overlapping shifts, a CRM and messaging suite subscription, a part-time editor, legal and compliance overhead, and whatever promotional spend survives the ad restrictions might run somewhere around $15,000 to $25,000 a month for an operation of that size. If those 8 creators collectively generate $80,000 a month in gross subscriber revenue, the platform's 20% cut takes that down to $64,000 before the agency ever sees a dollar. The agency's 35% share of that comes out to roughly $22,400, which barely clears the fixed cost floor once chargeback reserves and processing fees are accounted for. Push that same roster to $150,000 in gross revenue instead, and the agency's cut climbs to roughly $42,000, comfortably clearing fixed costs because most of the labor, the same chatters, the same shifts, doesn't scale linearly with revenue the way it would in a business paying per unit produced. That's the good news, buried inside a genuinely thin margin structure. Once a roster clears its fixed cost floor, additional revenue drops through at a much better rate than the first dollar did. Here's the part that decides which of 2 very different years you actually get. In the optimistic scenario, you built real banking redundancy before you needed it, kept your roster small enough that every creator is getting genuine chatter attention rather than a shared generic script, avoided a major platform policy shock during your first 18 months, and signed creators with existing audiences rather than betting entirely on building one from zero. Under those conditions,
A well-run boutique agency can post genuinely healthy margins, something the largest, most overextended rosters in the sector have mostly failed to do. In the realistic scenario, 2 or 3 ordinary things go wrong. Your primary payment processor tightens its reserve requirements without warning, holding back an extra 10% of every payout for a rolling 90-day window, right as payroll is due. A promotional account you spent months building gets suspended over a policy misunderstanding, cutting new subscriber acquisition by half for a quarter. 2 of your best performing creators leave for a competing agency offering a better split, taking their subscriber relationships and a meaningful share of your monthly revenue with them on 30 days' notice. None of these are exotic risks. They are the completely ordinary risks of this exact business, and stacked together, they are the difference between a healthy operation and one quietly bleeding out its reserve month after month, while the dashboard numbers still look, to anyone glancing at the top line, like the business is growing.
So, if you're still set on starting an OnlyFans agency, remember the one thing that actually determines whether you make it. It was never really about how many creators you could sign or how aggressively you could script the chats. It's about whether you can survive on the back half of a revenue split after 2 separate parties have already taken their cut, on top of a payment infrastructure that can tighten or vanish with almost no warning, and months of relationship building with banks, processors, and creators before any of it produces a dollar you can actually keep.